Before we begin, please subscribe to our new second dating horror channel, Cupid's Horror. Link in the description. Thank you. Online dating was never something I thought I'd try, but one slow evening, curiosity got the better of me. I created a profile on a dating app, filled it with a mix of carefully chosen photos and answers to random icebreaker questions, and then I started swiping. It felt oddly exhilarating, like flipping through a catalog of possibilities. After a few days of scrolling and small talk with several matches, I started chatting with Cormac. We messaged and hit that spark immediately. Our conversations were easy and lighthearted, filled with jokes about bad movies and shared love for a particular sci-fi author. I found myself looking forward to his replies. So when he asked if I'd like to meet up for coffee, I said yes. We decided on a small cafe downtown, cozy and bustling, but not overwhelming. I deliberately chose a public place because, well, it was online dating. You can't be too careful. I arrived a few minutes early, the mix of excitement and nerves tightening my stomach as I sipped on a glass of water and waited. When Cormac walked in, I recognized him immediately from his pictures. He was average height, neatly dressed in a button-down shirt and dark jeans, with a warm smile that put me at ease. "Hi Arlena, right?" he said, extending his hand. "That's me," I replied, shaking his hand and gesturing toward the chair across from me. The first half of the date went smoothly. We made small talk about work, hobbies, and our favorite places in the city. He seemed interested in my job as a graphic designer, asking thoughtful questions and sharing stories about his own work challenges. The conversation flowed easily, and I started to relax, thinking maybe this could turn into something good. But then about halfway through the date, something shifted. Cormac leaned forward, his tone becoming more serious. "You know," he began, "I've been thinking a lot about my future lately." "Yeah," I said, curious. "Yeah," he continued, his eyes lighting up with a strange intensity. "I've got everything planned out. I know exactly where I want to be in 5, 10, even 20 years. I smiled politely, unsure of where this was going. "That's great. It's good to have goals." "Oh, it's more than goals," he said, pulling out his phone. He opened a note-taking app and started scrolling through what looked like a never-ending list. "I've mapped out every step. By 32, I want to buy a house. By 35, I want to have 2 kids. By 40, I should be settled in my dream job, probably as a creative director. And somewhere in there, I want to travel to at least 30 countries." He kept going, outlining his life plan in meticulous detail. It wasn't just the big milestones. He had specific ages for when he wanted to take up new hobbies, start investing in real estate, and even retire. At first, I found it impressive, like he was someone who really had his life together. But the more he talked, the more unsettling it became. It wasn't just the detail, it was the way he spoke about it, like it was a script he had written for his life, with no room for deviation. He wasn't sharing dreams or aspirations, he was laying out expectations. And then he started slotting me into the plan. "You know," he said, looking at me intently, "I can see you fitting into all of this." I blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "Well," he said, smiling, "you're creative, driven, and you love hiking. You'd be a great fit for the kind of life I want to build. I can tell you'd make an amazing mom, too." I froze, unsure how to respond. We had just met. This was our first date. How could he already be talking about me fitting into his life plan? I tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "So, what's your favorite place you've traveled to?" I asked, forcing a smile. But Cormac didn't take the hint. Instead, he launched into a detailed analysis of his past relationships, explaining why each one had failed and how those experiences had shaped his expectations for a partner. It wasn't just the content of what he was saying, it was the detached, almost clinical way he said it, like he was analyzing failed business ventures rather than past loves. By this point, my unease had turned into full-blown discomfort. It felt like I wasn't a person to him, just a potential candidate for the role of wife and mother in his carefully curated life plan. I glanced around the cafe, searching for a distraction. The chatter of other patrons and the clinking of coffee cups faded into the background as Cormac continued talking, oblivious to my growing discomfort. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to get out of there. "I'm so sorry," I said, cutting him off mid-sentence. "I just remembered I have to check on something in my car." He looked surprised but nodded. "Sure, no problem. I'll wait here." I gathered my things, trying to keep my movements calm and casual, but as soon as I was outside, I let out a deep breath. The cool evening air hit my face, and I felt a wave of relief. I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and just sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Cormac hadn't done anything overtly wrong, but the intensity of his expectations and the way he spoke about his life plans had been overwhelming. I realized then that I didn't want to be slotted into someone else's script. I wanted a partner who saw me as an equal, not a supporting character in their pre-written story. When I got home, I replayed the date in my head, wondering if I had overreacted. But deep down, I knew my instincts had been right. Something about the way Cormac spoke and acted had felt off, and I had to trust that feeling. The next morning, I received a text from him. "Hey Arlena, I had a great time last night. Let me know when you'd like to meet up again." I stared at the message for a long moment before typing out a polite but firm reply. "Hi Cormac, thanks for the coffee, but I don't think we're a good match. I wish you all the best." I grew up in a small, quiet town in Alabama. Life there was slow-paced, predictable, and safe, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else and gossip traveled faster than the church bells ringing on Sunday morning. I graduated high school at 18, full of youthful optimism, but uncertain about my future. That summer, I met a man who would change my life in ways I could never have anticipated. His name was Alaric, and he was from a nearby city. I was instantly smitten when I met him. He wasn't like the guys from my town, the ones I'd grown up with, who wore the same muddy boots and baseball caps every day. Alaric was different. Everything about him seemed sophisticated and mysterious. We met at a small diner during one of my trips to the city with friends. He approached our table, introduced himself, and asked me if I wanted to go out for coffee sometime. I agreed without hesitation. Our first date was unforgettable. We sat in a dimly lit cafe, sipping on lattes and talking for hours. Alaric revealed something unexpected that night. He used to be part of a gang. I remember feeling a jolt of surprise when he said it so casually, but he quickly explained that it was a thing of the past. "I grew up in a rough neighborhood," he told me, his voice low and serious. "When you're surrounded by that kind of environment, you don't have many options." He assured me that he had left that life behind. He even showed me the tattoos that proved his affiliations, intricate designs inked into his skin. I Googled them later that night, and sure enough, they matched the symbols of a well-known gang. Everything he said lined up. Alaric didn't give me any bad vibes, though. Despite his past, he was a perfect gentleman. He opened doors for me, listened intently when I spoke, and treated me with kindness and respect. I was young and naive, but I believed him when he said he had turned his life around. We started dating, and for a few weeks, everything seemed perfect. I felt like I was in a dream, swept off my feet by this enigmatic man who made me feel special in a way I never had before. The night I stayed over at Alaric's apartment was when everything changed. It was the first time I had ever spent the night at his place. I was cautious by nature, and I had a self-imposed 3-date rule about staying over. But Alaric had been so sweet and patient, and I felt like I could trust him. His apartment was modest, clean, and decorated with a surprising sense of style. I remember thinking that it didn't look like the kind of place a former gang member would live in. That evening, Alaric's best friend, Ezekiel, stopped by. Ezekiel was tall and lanky, with a nervous energy that put me on edge. Alaric introduced him as an old friend, but it quickly became clear that there was more to their relationship. While Alaric stepped out to take a phone call, Ezekiel pulled me aside. "You know, we used to be on opposite sides," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I was in a rival gang," he admitted. "But Alaric and I go way back. We've got an understanding." He laughed nervously, as if that explained everything. I didn't know what to say. Why was he telling me this? Why hadn't Alaric mentioned it? My mind raced with questions, but before I could ask any of them, Alaric returned, and the conversation shifted to something mundane. Later that night, after Ezekiel left, I noticed something strange. Alaric's bedroom closet was slightly ajar, and inside, I caught a glimpse of what can only be described as an arsenal. There were guns, multiple guns, stacked neatly on shelves along with ammunition, a bulletproof vest, and even what looked like grenades. My stomach dropped. This wasn't normal. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself that maybe he was just overly cautious because of his past. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. As we lay in bed, I couldn't shake the image of that closet. I must have been quieter than usual, because Alaric asked me if something was wrong. I hesitated, then decided to be honest. "Why do you have so many weapons?" I asked. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he gave me a long, unreadable look before finally speaking. "I still take jobs sometimes," he said matter-of-factly. "Jobs?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded. "I'm still with the gang," he admitted. "I don't do much anymore, but if they need me, well, I handle things." "Handle things?" The words felt foreign in my mouth. "I'm a hitman," he said, his tone as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "Only when it's necessary." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process what I had just heard. He didn't look away, didn't try to sugarcoat it or explain himself further. His eyes were cold, devoid of any emotion. I felt a chill run down my spine. This man, the one who had been so kind and attentive, was admitting to killing people. I realized then that I didn't truly know him at all. I didn't leave that night. I was too scared to make a sudden move, afraid of what he might do if he sensed my fear. Instead, I stayed awake, my body tense and my mind racing. By morning, I had made up my mind. I couldn't be with someone like Alaric. No amount of charm or good looks could make up for what he had just revealed. When he dropped me off at my place the next day, I told him I needed some time to think. He didn't seem surprised, almost as if he expected it. I never called him again. He didn't try to contact me either, which was a relief. Looking back, I think he respected my decision, or maybe he just didn't care. I never told anyone about Alaric, not even my closest friends. It's a chapter of my life that I prefer to keep closed. But I learned something valuable from that experience. People aren't always who they appear to be. No matter how charming or kind someone seems, you should always trust your instincts, especially when something doesn't feel right. It was a year ago, and I was 19, living in a small town with not much to do. I was bored one night, scrolling through the web, looking for any distraction to pass the time. That's when I remembered Omegle, a site I hadn't visited in years. As a teenager, I used to spend hours on it, talking with strangers from all over the world. Sure, there were plenty of creeps, but there were also genuine, interesting people. I decided to give it another shot, not expecting much. I typed alternative into the interest tag, hoping to filter out some of the weirdos and connect with people closer to my age. After a few minutes of skipping dull or inappropriate chats, I matched with someone who called himself Cashin. Cashin was 23, a few years older than me, and lived about 3 hours away in another town. We talked all night, literally until 6 a.m., and I couldn't believe how easy it was to open up to him. At some point during the conversation, we started talking about where we lived. Cashin mentioned a beautiful mountain near his home called Oran Ridge, a place he loved to hike and camp. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "We should meet up sometime. I could take you camping there. It's amazing." I laughed, thinking he was joking, but he wasn't. "Seriously," he insisted. "It's not that far, and it would be fun." Part of me was hesitant. I'd never met anyone from Omegle in person before. It felt risky. But another part of me was intrigued. Cashin seemed normal, friendly, and genuinely interesting. I couldn't detect any red flags, and after hours of talking, I felt like I knew him. So against my better judgment, I said yes. We planned the trip for the following weekend, since he had those days off work. I asked for his number so we could coordinate more easily, and he gave it to me. When I texted him, the messages showed up green, indicating he had an Android. I teased him about it, joking that iPhones were far superior. His response was strange. "Oh, I have 2 phones," he said. "One for work and one for personal use." That set off a tiny alarm bell in my head. Why would a 23-year-old need 2 phones? It seemed odd, but I brushed it off. Maybe it was a work requirement or just a personal quirk. As the day of the trip approached, I started feeling a bit anxious. I Googled Oran Ridge to learn more about it, and I came across some concerning information. Apparently, the area was known for having contaminated soil due to old mining operations. There were warnings about arsenic exposure and advice to wash your clothes and shoes thoroughly after hiking there. I texted Cashin about it, asking why he'd chosen a place that could be potentially dangerous. He replied quickly, assuring me that it was safe. "I've camped there dozens of times," he said. "It's fine as long as you're careful. Besides, it's a really beautiful spot. You'll love it." That reassured me a little, but I still felt a nagging unease. My parents weren't thrilled about the idea of me meeting someone from Omegle, let alone going camping with him. I didn't tell them the full truth, of course. I said he was a friend I'd met through a video game and that we'd been talking for a month. Even then, they were skeptical. "You don't know this person," my mom said. "It's dangerous." But eventually, after much convincing, they reluctantly let me go. Cashin arrived at my house on the morning of the trip. He didn't come inside, opting to wait by his car instead. My mom came out to meet him briefly, asking a few questions about where we were going. He answered politely, smiling the whole time, which seemed to put her at ease. We stopped at a Starbucks near my house before starting the drive. He got a coffee, and we sat in his car for over an hour, listening to music. He had a notebook filled with the names of songs he liked, which he showed me proudly. It was a little quirky but kind of endearing. After a while, I suggested we get going so we could set up camp before dark. But Cashin kept saying, "Just 5 more minutes." It was frustrating, but I didn't push too hard. Finally, after half an hour of stalling, we started driving. The ride was long, over 3 hours, and Cashin spent most of it talking about himself. He shared stories about his friends, his ex-girlfriends, and his opinions on various topics. At one point, he mentioned that he only wore sustainable clothing and thought anyone who ate junk food was stupid. I tried to steer the conversation toward lighter topics, asking him about his hobbies. He mentioned that he liked to go on Omegle and tell people he was a Russian soldier who tortured people. I laughed nervously, assuming it was a weird joke, but he didn't laugh. He just smiled and said, "What? It's funny." It wasn't funny. It was unsettling. When we finally reached Oran Ridge, it was already late afternoon. The parking lot near the trailhead was small, with only a few spots. A couple of older men were hanging around their cars, smoking weed. Cashin parked and turned to me. "It's too cold to set up camp," he said. "What do you mean?" I asked. "We didn't come all this way for nothing." He insisted that the temperature was too low and that it would take too long to pitch the tent. He told me to get out of the car and feel how cold it was. I rolled down the window and stuck my hand out. The air was freezing, and the wind made it worse. Reluctantly, I agreed to sleep in the car for the night. I was disappointed, but I didn't want to argue. As night fell, the atmosphere in the car grew tense. Cashin became quieter, his mood shifting in a way I couldn't quite put my finger on. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through my phone, but he grabbed it from me and said, "Come here." Before I could react, he pulled me into the back seat. What happened next was something I'll never forget. Cashin assaulted me. I don't remember much of it. I think my mind blocked out the details to protect me. I just remember feeling frozen, unable to move or speak. When it was over, he smiled at me and said, "So, how was it?" I didn't respond. I couldn't. He climbed into the front seat and went to sleep like nothing had happened. I stayed in the back, curled up in a fetal position, staring out the window. The next morning, he acted as if everything was normal. He suggested we get breakfast at a nearby cafe, and I went along with it, too scared to protest. While we ate, I tried to think of a way to get home safely. I told him my mom wanted me back early, hoping that would convince him to leave. He seemed annoyed but eventually agreed. The drive back was silent, the air heavy with unspoken tension. When we reached my house, I grabbed my things and ran inside without looking back. That night, I blocked his number and deleted every trace of him from my phone. I didn't tell my parents what had happened. I couldn't bear to see their heartbreak. For months, I carried the weight of that night, blaming myself for trusting him. But over time, I realized the fault wasn't mine. It was his. I never thought I'd try online dating. It always seemed like something other people did, people who liked to take risks, or who didn't mind the uncertainty of talking to strangers from behind a screen. But after hearing success stories from friends, I decided to give it a shot. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just someone to share my time with and see where it went. That's how I met Thatcher. Thatcher stood out from the sea of profiles. His bio was simple but thoughtful, and his photos showed a man who seemed relaxed and confident, a rare combination. He was 31, worked as a financial analyst, and loved hiking and photography. He had this way of describing things that made even mundane topics seem interesting. After exchanging messages over the app for a week, we decided to meet in person. We chose a small cafe downtown, the kind of place with cozy booths and the smell of fresh pastries wafting through the air. The location felt safe, and Thatcher seemed like the kind of guy who wouldn't make me regret saying yes. When he walked in, I recognized him immediately. Thatcher was a little taller than I expected and had a warm, easy smile that put me at ease. We shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, and sat down. The conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about work, travel, and our favorite authors. Thatcher had a way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room. He listened intently, nodding at all the right moments, and even remembered small details from our online chats. I left the date feeling optimistic, thinking that maybe online dating wasn't as bad as I'd thought. But that feeling didn't last. A few days later, I received a strange message on social media. It was from an account I didn't recognize, with no profile picture or identifying information. The message was brief: "Be careful with Thatcher. He's not who he seems." At first, I shrugged it off. The internet is full of trolls, and this could easily be one of them. Besides, Thatcher hadn't done anything to make me suspicious. I ignored the message and went about my day. But then a few days later, I received another message, this time from a different account. The tone was the same: "Thatcher has a past. Watch your back." I started to feel uneasy. Who are these people? How did they know I was seeing Thatcher? And why were they sending these warnings? I decided to do a little digging. A quick search of Thatcher's name didn't reveal much, just his LinkedIn profile, a few social media accounts, and some basic information about his job. There was nothing alarming, no red flags. But the messages kept coming, each one more cryptic than the last. I tried to push the unease aside. Thatcher and I were still chatting regularly, and he seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We went on a second date, this time for a walk in the park. He brought his camera and took a few candid shots of the scenery, and of me. It felt sweet, like he wanted to capture the moment. But even as we laughed and talked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I kept thinking about those messages, about the possibility that Thatcher wasn't as perfect as he seemed. When I got home that night, I found another message waiting for me. "He's dangerous. Please be careful." That was the tipping point. I decided I couldn't ignore the warnings anymore. I told myself I'd bring it up with Thatcher the next time we talked. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Thatcher called me the next evening, his voice warm and cheerful. We chatted for a while before I finally worked up the courage to ask. "This might sound weird," I began, "but have you ever had someone try to warn people about you?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Thatcher finally spoke, his tone had changed. "What do you mean?" I explained about the messages, trying to keep my voice casual. "It's probably nothing," I said quickly. "Just some random trolls. But I thought I'd ask." Thatcher laughed, but it sounded forced. "Yeah, I've had a couple of exes who weren't exactly thrilled when things ended. Maybe it's one of them. I wouldn't worry about it." His explanation seemed plausible, but something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me. His laughter felt hollow, his words rehearsed. In the days that followed, the strange occurrences escalated. I started noticing a car parked on my street more often than seemed normal. It was an old, dark sedan, and I couldn't tell if anyone was inside. At first, I thought it was just a neighbor's car, but then it started appearing in places I didn't expect. Outside my gym, near my favorite coffee shop, even at the grocery store. I told myself it was a coincidence, but the uneasy feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. Then there were the login attempts. I began receiving notifications that someone was trying to access my social media accounts. Each time, I changed my passwords and tightened my privacy settings, but it didn't stop. One evening, as I was walking home from work, I had the distinct feeling that someone was following me. I glanced over my shoulder, but didn't see anyone. Still, the sensation was so strong that I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. When I got home, I texted Thatcher, telling him I needed some space. I used work as an excuse, saying I was overwhelmed and needed time to focus on myself. He replied almost immediately, saying he understood and would give me the space I needed. His response was kind and supportive, which only added to my confusion. If he was involved in any of this, he was doing an excellent job of hiding it. After that, the messages stopped. The car disappeared, and my accounts remained secure. It was as if someone had flipped a switch. Part of me was relieved, but another part was left with unanswered questions. Who had been sending those warnings? Was it really an ex of Thatcher's, or was there something darker at play? I never found out. Thatcher reached out a couple more times, but I kept my responses brief. Eventually, he stopped texting altogether, and I blocked his number. Looking back, I still don't know what to make of the experience. Maybe the warnings were legitimate, or maybe they were the work of someone with too much time on their hands. Either way, it left me shaken and more cautious about online dating. If there's one thing I've learned, it's to listen to your instincts. Even when you don't have all the answers, that little voice in your head is often trying to protect you. If something feels wrong, it probably is. It all started with a message I almost ignored. Online dating had become my go-to time killer, especially when work was slow and my inbox was empty. Most of the matches I came across were either boring, overly forward, or trying way too hard to be profound. But Orion's first message was different. I sense your aura is radiant, but slightly chaotic. Would you like me to read it for you over coffee? I'll admit, I laughed out loud. A psychic? On Tinder? It sounded absurd, but also kind of fun. I'd been on enough dates with gym bros and wannabe entrepreneurs to last me a lifetime, so why not mix it up? I decided to play along. Sure, I replied, but only if you promise not to tell me when I'll die. I'd like to keep some surprises in life. His response came quickly. Deal. But fair warning, the universe has a lot to say about you. We agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown. When I arrived, Orion was already seated at a corner table, sipping on what looked like a green smoothie. He was hard to miss, tall and lanky, with a head of messy, shoulder-length hair and a flowing linen shirt that screamed, "I do yoga and drink kombucha." "Arden," he said as I approached, standing up and taking my hand in both of his. "It's such a pleasure to meet you. Your energy is even more vibrant in person." "Thanks," I said, trying not to laugh. "I like to think I radiate something." We sat down, and he immediately launched into a discussion about chakras, past lives, and the vibrational frequencies of soul connections. I wasn't entirely sure what any of it meant, but I nodded along, fascinated by his enthusiasm. Things took a turn when he pulled out a deck of tarot cards. "I hope you don't mind," he said, shuffling the cards with surprising skill. "I brought these to help guide our conversation." "Sure," I said, shrugging. "Why not?" He laid out 3 cards and studied them intently, his brow furrowing. "Interesting," he murmured. "Your past is full of passion and fire, but your present shows a need for balance. As for your future," he paused dramatically, flipping over the last card. "That's the Ace of Wands," he said, looking up at me with a sly smile. "It represents a spark of energy, creativity, and, well, let's just say it's a very phallic card." I choked on my coffee. "Excuse me?" He leaned in, lowering his voice. "It's a sign that your romantic life is about to heat up. If you're open to it, of course." I wasn't sure whether to laugh, blush, or walk out. "Wow," I said, trying to keep a straight face. "That's quite the prediction." Despite the awkwardness, I stayed. Orion might have been a little eccentric, but he was entertaining, and I figured I'd at least get a good story out of the experience. As the date went on, he shared more about his psychic abilities. Apparently, he'd discovered them as a teenager after a near-death experience involving a bee sting and an allergic reaction. "Ever since then," he said, "I've been able to sense things. Energies, emotions, even desires." "Desires?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He nodded solemnly. "For example, I can tell that you're curious about me. You might even be wondering what it would be like to connect on a deeper level." I stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or be creeped out. "That's a bold assumption," I said, taking a sip of my coffee. "It's not an assumption," he replied, his eyes twinkling. "It's intuition." The conversation shifted to more mundane topics after that, and I started to relax a little. Orion was strange, but he wasn't the worst date I'd ever been on. That title belonged to a guy who spent an entire dinner talking about his collection of swords. Just as I was starting to think Orion might actually be kind of charming, disaster struck. We'd finished our drinks and were getting ready to leave when Orion stood up abruptly. His face went pale, and he grabbed the edge of the table for support. "Are you okay?" I asked, concerned. I think I need to sit back down," he said, his voice shaky. I helped him back into his chair, and that's when I noticed the dark stain spreading across the front of his linen pants. "Oh my God," I said before I could stop myself. Orion looked down, his face turning crimson. This is not what it looks like," he stammered. I didn't know what to say. Was he sick? Had he spilled something? "It's the universe," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes when I'm overwhelmed by energy, my body reacts physically." I stared at him, trying to process what I'd just heard. "Are you saying?" "It's not pee," he said quickly. "It's more like a spiritual release." I blinked, completely at a loss for words. To his credit, Orion tried to laugh it off. "Well, I guess this is one way to make a date memorable," he said, forcing a smile. "Yeah," I said, still in shock. "Memorable is one word for it." He excused himself to the bathroom, leaving me alone at the table. I debated whether to stay or make a run for it, but curiosity got the better of me. When he returned, he'd tied his linen shirt around his waist to cover the stain. "Sorry about that," he said. Working the night shift at a fast food restaurant wasn't exactly the glamorous life I'd imagined for myself, but it paid the bills while I juggled school during the day. Most nights were slow, especially during the last few hours before closing. I'd finish my tasks early, clean the counters, and wait for the occasional late-night customer to roll through the drive-thru. I was scrolling through Tinder one eve on my phone behind the counter. I'd recently joined the app after a slump. I came across a cute girl's profile. She was called Soraya's. Her profile picture was adorable, a sunny outdoor shot where she was smiling brightly, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail. Her bio was short but playful. I'm just a koala trying to survive in a world full of pandas. Let's talk about why koalas are the best. It was quirky enough to catch my attention. I swiped right and matched instantaneously. Feeling bold, I messaged her first. Okay, I'll bite. Why koalas? She replied almost immediately. Because they're cute and a little dumb, like me. Winking face with tongue. I laughed out loud. Her humor was refreshing, and we chatted back and forth for the next couple of hours. She asked about my job, and I told her I worked the night shift at a fast food place. I didn't think much of it. There were so many of our chain's locations in town that it felt like harmless information. We continued chatting until her shift at work started. She mentioned being a barista, and I ended up going back to cleaning the fryers. Later that night, as I was wrapping up my shift, a car pulled into the drive-thru queue. It was around 2 a.m., and I was surprised anyone was out this late. The speaker crackled to life, and I greeted the driver with my usual line. Welcome to Grill Haven. How can I help you? There was a pause before a voice replied. Hi, I'm looking for Daniel. I froze. My name wasn't on my uniform, and I didn't recognize the voice. This is Daniel, I said hesitantly. How can I help you? The car pulled up to the window, and the driver rolled down the window. My heart skipped a beat when I recognized her. It was Soraya. She grinned at me. Finally, I've been driving around to all the Grill Haven locations in town looking for you. I didn't know what to say. My brain was struggling to process the situation. I'd only started talking to her a few hours ago, and now she was here, at my job. Hey, I said, forcing a smile. What are you doing here? She tilted her head as if the answer was obvious. I wanted to meet you. You seemed cool, and I didn't want to wait until Friday. Friday was when we'd loosely talked about meeting up for coffee. I hadn't even confirmed the plan yet, and here she was, tracking me down in the middle of the night. That's really unexpected, I said, trying to keep my tone light. I'm still on the clock, though. That's okay, she said cheerfully. I'll wait. Soraya parked her car in one of the empty spots outside and got out, leaning against the hood as she scrolled through her phone. I glanced at my manager, who was watching the situation unfold from the back of the restaurant. He raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. I wasn't sure how to handle this. On the one hand, I didn't want to be rude. She seemed nice, if a little overenthusiastic. On the other hand, her behavior was unusual. When my shift ended an hour later, Soraya was still there, waiting by her car. I stepped outside, feeling a mix of curiosity and unease. Hey, she said, smiling brightly. Ready to hang out? I'm actually pretty tired, I said. It's been a long night. Her smile faltered for a moment before she recovered. That's okay. We can just talk for a bit. I drove all this way after all. I felt a pang of guilt. She had gone to a lot of effort to find me, even if it was a bit excessive. All right, I said, leaning against the wall of the building. What's up? She started talking about her day, her customers at the cafe where she worked, and her love for koalas. At first, it was harmless enough, but as the conversation went on, I noticed something strange. She wasn't really asking me anything about myself. It was like she'd already decided we were friends, or more than friends, and was just waiting for me to catch up. After about half an hour, I told her I needed to head home. I've got class in the morning, I said, hoping she'd take the hint. Instead, she offered to follow me home. I stared at her, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. What? Well, I don't want the conversation to end, she said, her tone casual. I could just hang out for a bit at your place. I felt my stomach twist. I don't think that's a good idea, I said firmly. I'm really tired. Her face fell, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something darker in her expression. Disappointment? Frustration? I couldn't tell, but it made me uneasy. All right, she said finally, her tone light again. I'll let you go, but you owe me coffee on Friday. I nodded, eager to end the conversation. Sure. Friday. Once I got home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her behavior had been so intense, so out of the ordinary. I decided to block her on Tinder, thinking it was better to cut ties now before things got any weirder. But that wasn't the end of it. The next day, I started receiving messages on Instagram from an account I didn't recognize. "Hey, it's me, Soraya. Why'd you block me on Tinder?" I didn't reply. A few hours later, did I do something wrong? I thought we had a connection. Still, I didn't respond. Then came the final message, and it sent a chill down my spine. "I know where you work. I can come by again if you want to talk." That night, I told my manager about the situation. He promised to keep an eye out for her and said he'd call the police if she showed up again. Thankfully, she didn't. For weeks, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting her to appear out of nowhere. I stopped using Tinder, deleted my Instagram, and tightened my privacy settings on every platform. Eventually, the messages stopped, and Soraya disappeared from my life as quickly as she'd entered it. So one evening, I downloaded one of the popular dating apps and set up a profile. After a few hours, I matched with Darla. Her profile immediately caught my attention. She had a bright, joyful smile in her photos, the kind that made it seem like she was always on the verge of laughter. Her bio was short and quirky: unbeatable at Scrabble, lover of bad puns, and perpetually searching for the best coffee in town. It was the kind of profile that made you want to know more. I sent her a message referencing her Scrabble skills. "Unbeatable, huh? That's a bold claim. I might have to test that." She responded almost immediately. "Bring it on. But don't say I didn't warn you." We started chatting, and it didn't take long for me to realize that Darla was as witty and charming as her profile suggested. We traded Scrabble-related puns and jokes about bad coffee, and before I knew it, we'd been messaging for hours. By the end of the week, we'd exchanged numbers and agreed to meet in person. On the day of our date, I drove to the address she'd given me. It was a trailer park on the outskirts of town, a bit more rundown than I'd expected. I tried not to let it color my impression of her. After all, I wasn't here to judge someone's living situation. Still, I couldn't help but feel a little uneasy as I pulled into the lot and parked in front of her trailer. I knocked on the door, nerves bubbling in my stomach. After a moment, it opened, and there she was. Darla looked different. In her pictures, she'd had a polished, put-together look, bright eyes, styled hair, and a natural glow. But the woman standing in front of me seemed like a shadow of that version. Her hair was unkempt, as if it hadn't been brushed in days, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She was heavier than I'd expected, too, though that didn't bother me as much as the overall sense that she hadn't been taking care of herself. "Hi," she said, smiling shyly. Her voice was warm and familiar, and for a moment that put me at ease. "Hi, Darla," I said, smiling back. "It's nice to finally meet you." She stepped aside to let me in, and I walked into a space that felt more cramped than cozy. The trailer was cluttered, with books, papers, and knickknacks covering almost every surface. There wasn't anywhere to sit comfortably, so I stood awkwardly by the door, trying to take it all in without staring. "Sorry about the mess," she said, laughing nervously. "I wasn't expecting company." "No worries," I replied, though the disarray made me a little uncomfortable. After a few minutes of small talk, Darla suggested we play Scrabble. "You've been talking a big game," she teased. "Let's see if you can back it up." I agreed, hoping the game would ease the tension. She pulled out an old Scrabble board, the kind that had clearly seen years of use, and we sat on the floor to play. The first game was intense. Darla was good, really good. She had an impressive vocabulary and a knack for finding high-scoring words in the most unexpected places. But I wasn't bad myself, and after a close match, I managed to win by a narrow margin. "Beginner's luck," she said with a grin, though I could see the flicker of disappointment in her eyes. We set up for a second round, and this time she played with even more determination. The game stretched on, with both of us carefully considering each move. I managed to win again, though just barely. Darla's smile faltered. "You're better than I thought," she said, her tone light but her expression strained. "I guess I underestimated myself," I joked, trying to keep things friendly. She laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. After a couple more games, I suggested we take a break. I was starting to feel the tension between us, and I thought maybe stepping away from the competition would help. But Darla seemed reluctant to stop. "Just one more," she said, her voice almost pleading. "I need to win at least one." Her insistence caught me off guard, but I agreed. As we played, I noticed a change in her demeanor. She was less playful, more focused. It was as if winning this game had become more important than anything else. When I won yet again, the disappointment on her face was impossible to miss. She sat back, staring at the board in silence for a moment before forcing a smile. "Well," she said, her voice tight, "I guess you really are unbeatable." "I wouldn't say that," I replied, trying to downplay the victories. "You're really good, I just got lucky." She didn't respond. Instead, she started gathering the tiles, her movements stiff and deliberate. As the evening went on, I began to feel more and more uneasy. Darla's mood had shifted, and the light-hearted banter from earlier was gone. I decided it was time to leave. "Thanks for the games," I said, standing up. "I should probably get going." She looked up at me, her eyes wide and glassy. "Already?" "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my tone gentle. "It's getting late." To my surprise, Darla's eyes filled with tears. Before I could react, she was on her knees, sobbing. "Please don't go," she said, her voice trembling. I don't want to be alone." I froze, unsure of what to do. "Darla, are you okay?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I thought this would go differently. I thought we'd hit it off, and maybe you'd stay." Her words trailed off, but the implication was clear. "Darla," I said carefully, "you're a great person, and I've had a nice time tonight. But I think we're looking for different things." Her sobs grew louder, and she reached out, grabbing my hand. "Please," she whispered. "Just stay a little longer." "We could." Her voice broke, and she didn't finish the sentence. I gently pulled my hand away, feeling a mix of sympathy and discomfort. "I think it's best if I go," I said softly. She didn't stop me this time. As I drove home, I replayed the evening in my head, feeling a swirl of emotions. Part of me felt guilty for leaving her in that state, but another part of me knew I'd made the right decision. The next morning, I woke up to a flood of messages from Darla. Some were angry, accusing me of leading her on. Others were desperate, begging me to give her another chance. A few were surprisingly friendly, asking when we could play Scrabble again. It was clear that Darla was struggling with something deeper than just a bad date. I didn't feel equipped to help her, nor did I think it was my responsibility. So, I blocked her number and deleted her from the app. Looking back, I realized that Darla's behavior wasn't entirely her fault. She was clearly dealing with issues that had nothing to do with me. But that doesn't change the fact that the experience left me shaken. I hope Darla found the help she needed. And as for me, well, I'm still out here, looking for someone who's a little less intense. After a string of mediocre dates and awkward conversations, I was starting to think online dating wasn't for me. But something about it kept me coming back. Maybe it was the hope that the next swipe could be the one. Or maybe I was just stubborn. Either way, that's how I met Ansel. When I arrived for our date, Ansel was already there, waiting at a table by the window. He looked just like his pictures, sandy brown hair, lean but not overly muscular, with a relaxed demeanor that immediately put me at ease. He greeted me with a warm smile and a firm handshake, and we settled into an easy rhythm of conversation. We talked about the usual first date stuff, jobs, hobbies, favorite places to eat in the city. He told me about his love of photography and how he liked to spend weekends exploring new hiking trails. I told him about my job as a teacher and how I spent my free time reading and gardening. There were no awkward silences, no forced laughs. By the time we finished our coffee, I was genuinely intrigued. Before we parted ways, he suggested meeting up again. "Maybe we could check out that park you mentioned," he said. I agreed, thinking it might be nice to see him in a more relaxed setting. A few days later, I was at the grocery store picking up some essentials when I spotted him. Ansel, standing a few aisles over, examining a row of avocados like he was trying to crack a code. I smiled, thinking it was a funny coincidence. "Ansel?" I called out. He turned, looking momentarily surprised before breaking into a grin. "Hey Arwen, fancy seeing you here." We chatted briefly, and he joked about how this could count as our second date. I laughed, brushing it off as a cute coincidence, and we went our separate ways. But then a week later it happened again. I was on my usual morning run at the park, enjoying the crisp air and the quiet hum of nature, when I saw him sitting on a bench, scrolling through his phone. My initial reaction was to wave and say hi, but something about the situation felt strange. The park wasn't small, but it also wasn't the kind of place you'd just stumble upon unless you lived nearby, and I knew from our conversations that Ansel didn't live in my neighborhood. "Hey," I said, slowing to a stop. "Arwen." He looked up, seemingly delighted. "I didn't know you ran here." I come here sometimes to clear my head. Yeah, this is my usual spot, I replied, my smile faltering slightly. We chatted for a few moments before I continued my run, but the encounter left me unsettled. What were the odds that he'd show up at the same park I went to every week? The next encounter pushed my unease into full-blown suspicion. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was at my favorite bookstore, browsing the fiction section. I just picked up a novel when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Find anything good? I turned to see Ansel standing there, holding a book of his own. My stomach dropped. Oh, hey, I said, trying to keep my tone light. Didn't expect to see you here. Yeah, I was in the area and thought I'd stop by, he said casually. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This wasn't the kind of bookstore you'd just stop by. It was tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, and I'd never mentioned it to him. We chatted briefly, but I couldn't focus. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what was happening. Was it all just a series of coincidences, or was he deliberately showing up in my spaces? After that, I started paying closer attention. Everywhere I went, I found myself looking over my shoulder, scanning for familiar faces. I stopped posting my location on social media, tightened my privacy settings, and even varied my routines. But it didn't seem to matter. A week later, I was walking home from work when I noticed a car driving slowly behind me. It wasn't overtly suspicious, but something about it felt off. I quickened my pace, and the car eventually turned down another street, but the encounter left me shaken. When I got home, I locked all my doors and checked my windows. My heart was racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I decided to confront Ansel. The next time he called, I brought it up. Hey, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. Have you been following me? There was a pause on the other end of the line. What? No, of course not. Why would you think that? I hesitated, unsure how much to say. It's just, I've seen you a lot lately. At the grocery store, the park, the bookstore, it feels like more than a coincidence. He laughed, but it sounded forced. Arwen, I promise it's just a coincidence. I mean, we live in the same city. It's bound to happen, right? Maybe, I said, though I wasn't convinced. The breaking point came 2 days later. I decided to take a different route home from work, one that added an extra 15 minutes to my commute, but avoided the places where I'd seen Ansel. As I neared my apartment, I glanced across the street and saw him. He was standing on the corner, leaning against a lamppost, scrolling through his phone. My stomach turned. This wasn't a coincidence. He didn't live in my neighborhood, and there was no reason for him to be there. I walked past him without saying a word, my heart pounding in my chest. When I got to my apartment, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. I blocked his number that night. The next few weeks were tense. I varied my routines even more, avoided my usual haunts, and kept my eyes peeled for any sign of him. Slowly, the sightings stopped. Part of me wonders if he realized I'd caught on, or if he just lost interest. Either way, I'm relieved that he's out of my life. Looking back, I can't say for sure what Ansel's intentions were. Maybe he was just overly enthusiastic, someone who didn't realize how his behavior came across. Or maybe he was something darker, someone who enjoyed the control of knowing where I was and when. Whatever the case, the experience taught me an important lesson. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, don't ignore it. Your safety is more important than politeness or giving someone the benefit of the doubt. Ansel may have been a part of my life for only a brief time, but the impact of his actions lingers. I've learned to be more cautious, to guard my privacy, and to listen to that little voice in my head that tells me when something isn't right. It was a job like any other, long hours, repetitive tasks, and the same faces day in and day out. I'd been working at this food warehouse for about 7 years, a place where the air smelled like cardboard and dry goods, and the fluorescent lights buzzed louder than the conversations in the break room. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. That's when I met Ivor. Ivor joined the team as a selector, and from the first day, he was noticeable. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with a wiry frame that made him look both lanky and strong at the same time. He was quiet at first, keeping to himself during breaks. But what stood out most about Ivor was his work ethic. He was one of the best selectors we'd ever had. He never made mistakes, hit his quotas effortlessly, and seemed to genuinely enjoy the grind. It was almost unnerving how good he was. When I tried to make small talk with him in the beginning, he'd smile politely but keep his responses short. "How's it going, Ivor?" I'd ask. "Good," he'd reply, and that was it. But over time, he opened up. It started with small interactions, him joining in on a joke during break or offering unsolicited tips on how to stack pallets more efficiently. Eventually, we started joking around more, and I realized he had a sense of humor, albeit a quiet one. Ivor was always listening to country music on his headphones while he worked, and it drove me crazy. I hated country music. Sometimes, when I was working a few aisles over and could hear it blasting through his headphones, I'd yell, "Turn that crap off." He'd yell back, "Huh? You're just jealous." It became a running joke between us. As we became better friends, Ivor started to share more about his personal life. He told me about his girlfriend, Tabitha, a girl he'd been dating for a couple of years. From the way he described her, she sounded young, too young. "She's 17, he admitted one night over beers at the bar after our shift. I raised an eyebrow. "You're 21, man. That's kind of a big gap." He shrugged. "She's mature for her age. Besides, we've been together for a while. Her parents like me." Something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me, but I let it go. Ivor was a bit odd, sure, but he was harmless. At least, that's what I thought. Over the next couple of years, Ivor and I grew closer. He started coming over to my place after work to drink beer and play video games. He was obsessed with Gears of War, and we'd spend hours yelling at the screen, taking turns trying to outdo each other. My wife didn't mind him hanging around. She thought he was kind of sweet, in a weird way. I even met Tabitha once. She was petite with dark hair and big brown eyes that sparkled when she looked at Ivor. She didn't say much while she was at my house, just stayed in the kitchen, chatting with my wife while Ivor and I played games. But it was clear she adored him. One day, Ivor told me Tabitha was pregnant. I was shocked. "You're gonna be a dad?" He grinned. "Yeah, man. Crazy, huh?" "Crazy is one word for it," I said, laughing. He seemed happy, though, and for a while, everything seemed normal. Fast forward to 2012. I had my first child in 2010, and Ivor's son, Clayton, was about 4 years old by then. He looked just like his dad, skinny, tan, and full of energy. Ivor would bring him over sometimes, and our kids would play together while we drank beer on the porch. One night, Ivor came by after his shift like he often did. He seemed normal, his usual goofy self. We sat on the porch, watching the kids chase each other around the yard, and talked about work, life, and video games. He didn't mention that he and Tabitha were having problems. He didn't say anything that would have made me think something was wrong. He left around 9 p.m., saying he wanted to get Clayton home before it got too late. The call came hours later. It was from Lena, an old fling I hadn't spoken to in years. I answered groggily, the sound of her voice pulling me from sleep. "Have you heard what happened?" she asked, her voice shaking. "What are you talking about?" I mumbled, rubbing my eyes. "It's Ivor," she said. "He killed Tabitha." The words didn't register at first. "What?" "He punched her in the throat," Lena said, her voice breaking. "She didn't make it." I sat up, my heart pounding. "Lena, that doesn't make sense. I just saw him. He was fine." But the story kept pouring out of her. After he killed Tabitha, Ivor had panicked. He'd taken her body, put it in her car, and driven out to the countryside. He staged the scene to look like an accident, setting the car on fire and running it off the road. Then he ran home, losing one of his shoes along the way. Then, as if nothing had happened, he picked up Clayton and fled the state. The next few days were surreal. The warehouse was buzzing with rumors. Everyone had heard about what happened, but no one could believe it. Ivor, the quiet, hard-working guy who never got mad, had killed his girlfriend. I couldn't process it. I kept replaying our last conversation in my head, looking for signs I might have missed. But there was nothing. He'd seemed so normal. They caught him in Kentucky a couple of days later. He didn't resist arrest, and from what I heard, he confessed almost immediately. The trial was a nightmare. I didn't go, couldn't bring myself to face him, but I followed the news closely. He claimed it had been an accident, that he hadn't meant to kill her. But the evidence told a different story. In the end, he was sentenced to 15 years in prison. It didn't feel like enough. Ivor will be eligible for parole in 5 years. They're already petitioning to keep him locked up longer. I hope they succeed because the thought of him walking free, living his life after what he did, makes my blood boil. It was late April when everything changed, one of those soft, golden afternoons when the world seemed determined to convince you everything would work out in the end. I never expected a casual relationship to unravel in such a bizarre, unsettling way. But maybe spring, with its deceptive warmth and sudden storms, was the perfect metaphor for how Nick swept into my life and left it forever marked. I'd always liked spring in Nashville. The city came alive with cherry blossoms lining West End Avenue, cafes opening their patios again, and music spilling out of every open window in the Gulch. The world woke up, shaking off winter's gloom, and for a little while, anything felt possible. It was in that hopeful mood I first met Nick. I ran a small bookstore in East Nashville, tucked away near the Five Points area. A cozy, quiet place named Novel Idea, filled with worn chairs, stacks of novels, and regular customers who lingered over coffee. My life was calm, predictable even, exactly how I liked it. Then one spring afternoon, Nick walked in. Sunlight streaming through the windows illuminated his dark hair and tattoos snaking up both arms, vibrant colors peeking out from beneath his sleeves. His confident stride and casual smile made him impossible to ignore. Noticing my gaze, he grinned warmly, leaning casually against the checkout counter. "You must be Cassie," he said, extending a tattooed hand. "I am," I replied, cautiously amused. "Have we met?" "Nope. But your assistant Beth recommended you," he explained. "I'm Nick. I just opened the tattoo parlor down the block. Thought I'd introduce myself." I smiled politely, intrigued despite myself. We chatted easily for a few minutes. He mentioned his move from Austin, his passion for art, his excitement about East Nashville's creativity. Something about his openness was appealing, refreshing even. Before he left, Nick turned back, grinning playfully. "Hey Cassie, maybe I'll convince you to get your first tattoo one day." I laughed lightly, shaking my head. Not a chance. Yet somehow, despite my initial hesitation, we started spending time together. It began as coffee breaks at Bongo Java, walks in Shelby Bottoms Park, and occasional dinners at Mas Taco's Poor Favor. It was casual, comfortable, and surprisingly easy. Nick's energy brought a vibrant contrast to my quiet routine. But as weeks passed, something subtle shifted. Our conversations grew deeper, his laughter warmer, and his gestures became more intimate. In mid-May, during one of Nashville's sudden rainstorms, we sat sheltered under the awning at Barista Parlor, sipping coffee as rain pounded the pavement. He reached over suddenly, tracing gentle circles across my palm, his eyes intense. "You're special, Cassie," he murmured softly. "I've never met anyone like you." Something about the sincerity of his voice warmed me, even as it stirred unease. I wasn't ready for intensity, especially from Nick, whose spontaneity already made me cautious. But I brushed aside the worry, enjoying the gentle warmth of his touch and the soft whispers of rain. A week later, on another perfect spring day, Nick appeared at the bookstore, buzzing with excitement. It was unusually busy, customers browsing quietly, sunlight filling the cozy space. Nick leaned casually against the counter, his grin mischievous. "I have something special to show you tonight," he whispered, his eyes dancing with excitement. "Should I be worried?" I teased gently, ignoring the quiet voice of caution within me. "You'll see," he said mysteriously, turning to leave. "Come by the shop after closing. You won't regret it." Intrigued but wary, I arrived later at his studio, Iron and Ink Tattoos, just after sunset. The shop was empty, the air fragrant with disinfectant and ink. Nick stood beside his chair, grinning broadly, his eyes sparkling mischievously. "What's going on?" I asked nervously, already sensing something unusual. Without a word, he slowly rolled up his sleeve, revealing his forearm. My stomach tightened sharply at the fresh ink, delicate script spelling out my initials, CLH, boldly etched into his skin. "Surprise," he said softly, his voice suddenly vulnerable. "I wanted something permanent. Something to show how serious I am about you." Shock held me speechless. Permanent? Serious? We'd only been seeing each other casually for a few weeks, barely a month. My heartbeat quickened uncomfortably, panic fluttering in my chest. "Oh, Nick, I finally managed. Why would you do this?" His smile faltered slightly, confusion clouding his expression. "I thought you'd love it. Isn't this romantic?" "Romantic?" I echoed weakly, trying desperately to find gentle words. "Nick, this feels too soon. We've barely started dating. It's just, I wasn't expecting something so permanent." His expression shifted rapidly from confusion to hurt. His arm dropped heavily to his side, disappointment clear in his eyes. The once playful sparkle dimmed abruptly. "I thought you felt it too," he murmured, quietly wounded. "That this was special, real." "It is special," I said softly, stepping closer, trying to soothe his hurt feelings without encouraging more intensity. "But this tattoo, it's just too much, Nick. It scares me." For several painful moments, we stood silently in the quiet studio, tension thickening the air. Nick's posture stiffened, his shoulders heavy with disappointment. "I guess I misunderstood," he finally said bitterly. "I thought you'd appreciate it." "Nick," I began gently, reaching out instinctively. But he pulled away sharply, eyes distant now. "It's fine, Cassie," he interrupted curtly. "Forget it." Afterward, our interactions turned awkward, strained. I struggled with guilt, unsure how to repair the fragile bond his impulsive tattoo had cracked. But something between us had permanently shifted. The ease we once shared was replaced by an uncomfortable silence. As spring shifted towards summer, Nick avoided me completely. I occasionally glimpsed him walking briskly past my shop, his gaze averted. Then one day, I saw him with a bandaged arm, clearly covering fresh work. My heart sank. A quick check of his Instagram confirmed my suspicion. He'd covered the tattoo of my initials, replacing it with dark shading, intricate patterns masking what he'd once proudly displayed. That night, alone in my quiet bookstore, sadness enveloped me. It wasn't just about the tattoo, but about how quickly feelings can blossom and fade, especially when forced into premature permanence. Nick had meant well, but his impulsive gesture revealed a gulf between us, a mismatch of timing, emotion, and expectation. Weeks later, near the end of spring, I found myself strolling along West End Avenue again. Cherry blossoms, once vibrant, had faded, petals scattered on the sidewalks, a quiet reminder of spring's brief, beautiful illusions. Relationships, like seasons, often promised more permanence than reality delivered. I never imagined something as trivial as a collection of vintage records could unravel everything I thought I knew about someone. But life has a way of bringing hidden tensions to the surface, especially when it comes to sharing things with someone you love. I moved to Austin 5 years ago, chasing a job as a graphic designer for a startup downtown. I settled quickly into a modest apartment in the trendy South Congress neighborhood, filled with local coffee shops, vintage boutiques, and a vibrant music scene. My life was simple but comfortable. Saturday mornings at Joe's Coffee, evenings catching shows at Antone's, weekends spent flipping through vinyl at Waterloo Records. That's how I met Mia. It was a humid Sunday afternoon, the Texas heat shimmering off the pavement outside Waterloo. I was browsing through classic rock albums when she stepped beside me, long auburn hair loosely braided, dark eyes scanning the covers intently. "Looking for something special?" I asked casually. Mia smiled, a bit shyly at first. "Always looking," she laughed softly. That afternoon we talked music, sharing stories over iced coffees at Bennu Coffee, realizing we had more in common than just vinyl records. Mia was witty, creative, and a free spirit who moved from Asheville, North Carolina, to pursue her love of photography. She was also unapologetically spontaneous, which was both charming and occasionally exhausting. But I liked that about her, at first. Our relationship moved quickly. Within 6 months, Mia practically lived at my place. I enjoyed having her there. She brought warmth and laughter to my quiet life. It seemed natural to share everything with her, my apartment, my groceries, my Netflix password, everything. Sharing became second nature. But soon, small things started to grate on me. Mia would borrow my camera gear without asking, help herself to my clothes, rearrange furniture without mentioning it. At first, I brushed it off, chalking it up to her creative impulses. It wasn't a big deal. Until it was. The real trouble started with my vinyl collection. I'd spent years carefully building it, each record carrying sentimental value. Limited editions from Amoeba Music in San Francisco, first pressings from Reckless Records in Chicago. They were more than music, they represented memories. One evening, after dinner at Hopdoddy Burger Bar, we returned to my place. Mia immediately went over to my shelf and pulled out a limited edition Bowie record, one I'd never even played, saving it for a special occasion. "Mind if I borrow this?" she asked casually, already sliding it into her bag. Sure," I replied hesitantly. She caught my uncertainty, pausing slightly. "I'll take good care of it," she said lightly, flashing a playful smile. I shrugged it off, not wanting to seem petty. After all, it was just a record, right? Days later, I spotted it on her coffee table. Unprotected, the sleeve creased, vinyl lying exposed, collecting dust. My heart dropped. When I gently confronted her, she laughed it off. "It's just a record, Alex. Relax." But it wasn't just a record, not to me. Things escalated quickly after that. Mia became increasingly comfortable taking whatever she pleased, ignoring my subtle hints about respecting boundaries. Books, clothing, even my carefully labeled camera lenses. She saw my hesitation as silly, even selfish. The tipping point came on a warm spring evening. I'd returned home after a stressful day, looking forward to unwinding by sorting through my vinyl. But something felt off the moment I stepped inside. The apartment felt rearranged, unsettled. My heart sank as I saw Mia, seated cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by stacks of my records. Sleeves lay scattered carelessly around her, vinyl piled haphazardly. She was cutting album covers, creating some sort of collage, destroying memories I'd spent years preserving. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice shaking. She looked up, scissors frozen mid-slice. "Oh hey, I'm working on an art piece. Your album art is perfect for this." Anger surged through me, sharp and hot. "Mia, those were mine. You didn't even ask." Her expression shifted from surprise to irritation. "I didn't think I needed permission. We share everything, remember?" "Not like this," I said firmly. "Not my records." She stood slowly, frustration flickering in her eyes. "It's just stuff, Alex. You're overreacting." Something in me snapped. Without thinking, I stepped forward, gathered the ruined records, and walked straight out onto the balcony overlooking South Congress Avenue. Without hesitation, I dropped them into the dumpster below. They fell with a dull, painful thud. Mia stared at me, speechless. I felt strangely numb, standing there empty-handed, my chest tight with regret but also relief. "That was petty," Mia finally whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Maybe," I admitted, meeting her gaze. "But you can't just take what's mine and call it sharing. That wasn't yours to destroy." The silence that followed was deafening. Mia didn't apologize. She just turned away, gathering her things quietly. "I guess we're not as compatible as I thought," she said coldly, finally breaking the silence. The following days felt empty and strange. Mia distanced herself, sending brief, curt messages whenever we spoke. I felt a mixture of guilt and sadness, but deep down, I knew I'd done what I needed to do. Sharing a life with someone didn't mean sacrificing your own boundaries or losing your sense of self. Eventually, we broke up quietly. Mia moved to East Austin, and we drifted apart. Friends occasionally asked what happened, and when I explained, some understood, others shrugged, saying, "It's just stuff." But it wasn't just stuff. It was about respect, respect for boundaries, respect for each other's histories, respect for what's personal. My records had only been the catalyst, revealing how different Mia and I truly were beneath the surface. Months passed, and eventually, I found myself at Waterloo Records again, quietly rebuilding my collection. I couldn't replace the memories lost, but I could move forward, choosing carefully who I allowed into my shared spaces. Austin remained my home, vibrant and comforting, but my experience with Mia had changed me. It taught me something important. Real love and intimacy aren't built by erasing boundaries. They're built by respecting them. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy who fell for a scheme, especially something that seemed so obviously shady in hindsight. But sometimes people come into your life and blind you to reason, making even the most cautious person ignore all the red flags waving desperately in front of them. Natalie was exactly that kind of person. I'd always been careful. As an accountant living in Denver, Colorado, my entire career revolved around precision, detail, and skepticism. My life was stable, comfortable, but admittedly predictable. Each morning, I'd take the same route from my apartment near Union Station, grab coffee at Little Owl, then head to my downtown office on 17th Street. Evenings were usually spent running along the Cherry Creek Trail, dinner at home, and weekends wandering bookstores like Tattered Cover. Predictable, until Natalie walked into my world. We met at a networking event hosted at the Maven Hotel near Coors Field. Natalie stood out immediately, effortlessly working the room with a charisma I'd rarely encountered. Confident, witty, and strikingly attractive, she drew people in, myself included. When we finally spoke, she listened intently, her eyes focused solely on me, as though no one else mattered. Natalie told me about her background, a series of successful ventures, an MBA from UCLA, experience with tech startups in Palo Alto. She seemed legitimate, experienced, and genuine. She had a spark, a sense of adventure I desperately craved in my mundane routine. Soon, we found ourselves spending evenings at Avani Food and Beverage, talking business and sharing laughs, blending personal and professional lives effortlessly. Then, one afternoon over lunch at Root Down, Natalie revealed her next big idea, a wellness product that was poised to revolutionize the health industry. At first, it seemed credible enough, premium supplements, scientifically tested, backed by enthusiastic investors. Natalie's excitement was contagious. She painted a compelling picture of a booming market, easy profits, and most importantly, the chance to build something meaningful together. "It's not about the money," she'd always say convincingly, eyes shining. "It's about making a difference." Despite my instincts, I found myself intrigued. I liked her confidence, her passion, her vision. But what really hooked me was Natalie herself. How effortlessly she inspired trust, weaving her dream until it became ours. A month later, she invited me to a gathering at an upscale co-working space in Rhino, filled with young professionals eager to change the world, or at least their own financial situations. Natalie stood in front, magnetic as always, detailing the business model: recruit distributors, create a sales team, earn commissions. It sounded simple, almost too simple. A voice in my head whispered that it might be a pyramid scheme, but Natalie's assurance drowned out my doubt. "Pyramids are illegal," she laughed softly, noticing my skepticism. "This is direct sales. Everyone benefits." I ignored the nagging feeling in my gut and eventually invested, not small amounts either. At first, it seemed to work. I brought in some friends who were equally excited. Sales started rolling, checks arrived regularly, and Natalie was thrilled. We celebrated successes at chic restaurants in Lodo, toasting champagne at Rioja, believing we'd cracked the code. But soon, cracks appeared. Sales slowed. The products were overpriced, impossible to sell without recruiting more people. My friends struggled, their enthusiasm dwindling, frustrations mounting. Money that had initially trickled in stopped flowing altogether. Instead, debt started piling up. Stress gnawed at me nightly, sleep becoming increasingly elusive. When I brought my concerns to Natalie, she brushed them aside, a dismissive wave of her hand. "You're panicking too soon," she'd reassure me calmly. "Trust the process. Success takes patience." Patience, I learned, was her go-to phrase, an empty promise designed to string me along. Deep down, I knew I'd been played, but admitting it meant acknowledging I'd ignored every logical instinct, blinded by Natalie's charisma. Eventually, reality hit hard. A news story broke on local Denver stations, exposing the venture as precisely what I'd feared, a thinly veiled pyramid scheme, already under investigation. My heart sank, panic twisting in my gut. I confronted Natalie, frantic and angry, demanding answers. She barely reacted, calmly sipping espresso at Crema Coffee House as I laid out my ruined finances, destroyed friendships, and shattered trust. Her response was cold, distant, a bitter truth she no longer cared to hide. "Ethan, you knew the risks," she said dismissively. "It's your own fault you believed it would be easy." The cruelty of her words stunned me into silence. She offered no apologies, no reassurance, just the cold truth. I'd been nothing but a means to an end. Natalie had gotten what she needed, my money, my connections, and now I was disposable. I watched her walk out calmly onto Larimer Street, leaving me stunned, betrayed, and financially devastated. In the weeks that followed, the damage became painfully clear. Friends I'd brought into the scheme distanced themselves, hurt and betrayed by my involvement. My carefully built reputation crumbled, leaving me ashamed, humiliated, and alone. The confident, cautious accountant had fallen spectacularly, his judgment completely compromised by blind trust. Natalie disappeared from Denver entirely. Her social media showed glimpses of a new life: San Diego beaches, Malibu sunsets, proof she had moved on easily, untouched by the wreckage left behind. I, however, spent months piecing my life back together, wrestling with the painful realization that I'd let charisma override common sense. Yet, even in my darkest moments, something important became clear. Natalie's betrayal had exposed more than just a financial scam. It revealed a vulnerability within me, a willingness to ignore instincts in the face of charm and persuasion. I'm still rebuilding, slowly restoring trust with friends, settling debts, healing emotional wounds. Denver, once a city I adored without reservation, now carries bittersweet memories. I walk the streets differently now, more guarded, careful about who earns my trust. It's funny how life always has a way of reminding you how little you really know about someone, especially someone you think you understand completely. That's exactly what happened when I met Lucy. At first, everything felt simple. It felt real. I had no idea I was just another strand in her carefully woven web. I'd moved to Seattle 3 years earlier, taking a cozy little loft on Capitol Hill. Life as a freelance photographer meant freedom. Coffee at Victrola, late-night ramen at Oink, wandering the streets capturing rain-streaked scenes that I later sold to travel magazines. My life was predictable in the best way, quietly adventurous and uncomplicated. That changed the day I walked into Elliott Bay Book Company on 10th Avenue, intending to pick up a new photography anthology. That's when I saw Lucy for the first time. She stood by the travel section, flipping through a guidebook on Iceland, her dark hair spilling carelessly over her shoulders, one eyebrow raised skeptically. Something about her presence was captivating, confident yet approachable. I remember walking over, casually suggesting the Reykjavik guide next to it. She glanced up at me, smiling playfully, and my carefully balanced life tilted. Within days, we met again at Optimism Brewery, swapping stories over craft beers until the staff gently suggested we leave at closing time. Lucy was a travel blogger, vibrant and effortlessly charming. She seemed to know everyone, always laughing, eyes sparkling as she shared tales of backpacking in Europe, festivals in Asia, and hidden beaches in South America. Her life sounded like a highlight reel, exciting yet somehow mysterious. Maybe that should have been my first clue, but I was too caught up to notice. Weeks quickly turned to months, and things were good. Our relationship stayed casual. Comfortable dates at Cary Park overlooking the skyline, street tacos at Tacos Chukis, and afternoons exploring Pike Place Market. Nothing heavy. It was easy, exactly how we both liked it. Or at least, how I thought she liked it. Then, one rainy afternoon at Café Allegro near the University of Washington, something happened that changed everything. Lucy was running late, and I sat quietly with my camera, mindlessly scrolling Instagram. A group of Lucy's acquaintances was huddled nearby, sipping coffee and gossiping quietly. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but one name caught my attention clearly. Lucy. She's still going through with it? One girl said quietly, disbelief evident in her voice. I honestly thought she'd change her mind. Well, the guy's already bought a ring, another responded, her voice low, tense. They booked a venue in Auckland months ago. Lucy says it's happening, no backing out now. My heart stuttered painfully in my chest. Auckland? Venue? Ring? They couldn't mean my Lucy. I listened closer, dread pooling in my stomach. The conversation continued in whispers, but I caught enough fragments to piece it together. Lucy had a fiancé in New Zealand, someone she'd met months before. They were getting married soon. It had been planned long before we met. She had never mentioned it to me, not once. Suddenly, the cafe felt suffocating, my pulse thundering in my ears. When Lucy finally walked in, soaked from the rain but still smiling brightly, I forced myself to pretend nothing was wrong. She leaned in for a kiss, but it felt hollow now, her laughter empty. I had trusted her, even admired her carefree independence, only to find myself caught in a secret I wasn't supposed to uncover. For days afterward, I wrestled with the truth. It seemed impossible. Maybe there was some misunderstanding, some other Lucy in Seattle with a similar story. I wanted desperately to believe I was wrong. Then came the moment that made everything painfully clear. Scrolling through Instagram one evening, alone in my Capitol Hill loft, a photo stopped me cold. Lucy, radiant and smiling, stood in front of Auckland's sparkling waterfront, her dark hair blowing gently in the wind. Beside her was a man I'd never seen, tall, rugged, grinning confidently. Counting down the days with you, the caption read, followed by a wedding hashtag. I felt like I'd been punched. My fingers trembled as I clicked deeper into her carefully curated feed, now seeing clearly what I had overlooked. Photos from New Zealand months earlier, vague but suggestive captions, cryptic comments from people I never knew existed. How had I missed all the signs? My phone buzzed suddenly, a text from Lucy. Miss you, let's grab sushi at Japanesa tomorrow. She was still playing this game, juggling her worlds so effortlessly it left me feeling dizzy and nauseous. I wanted to confront her, demand answers, but pride and fear tangled together inside me. Instead, I replied simply, "Can't tomorrow. Sorry." It felt weak, but I couldn't bring myself to face her just yet. Days stretched painfully slow, my mind replaying every moment we shared. What had I meant to her, if anything at all? A week later, another photo appeared, stopping my heart again. Lucy, standing on a white sand beach, turquoise waves lapping behind her. Her fiancé beside her, arms wrapped tightly around her waist. The caption read, "Forever starts now. Hashtag just married." I stared numbly at the screen. Married. The word echoed inside my skull, cold and relentless. It was over, and I'd never even had the courage to confront her. Lucy had simply moved on, stepping gracefully from one carefully planned life into another, leaving me tangled in her web. I didn't reach out again. I didn't know how. Instead, I quietly withdrew, deleting her number, unfollowing her feeds, cutting every invisible thread connecting us. Seattle felt lonelier afterward, my once comfortable routine shattered by unanswered questions and lingering self-doubt. Months later, as autumn rain swept across Capitol Hill, I sat quietly in Elliott Bay Books, absent-mindedly flipping through a photography anthology, the very one I'd intended to buy the day I met Lucy. In its pages, I found snapshots of distant places, people with lives entirely separate from mine. It reminded me how little we truly see of the stories unfolding around us. Lucy's web had trapped me briefly but completely, leaving scars hidden behind casual smiles and careful silences. Even now, when I cross paths with strangers in coffee shops or bookstores, I wonder what secrets they carry, what strands they quietly weave. Trust is delicate, easily broken, and impossible to fully restore once lost. Lucy taught me that, and while the bitterness of betrayal has softened over time, its lesson remains sharp. People can hide entire worlds behind smiles and laughter, carefully maintaining illusions until the truth finally surfaces. Seattle is still my home, still familiar, but something in me changed. I wander the city streets with a photographer's eyes, more observant now, recognizing that beneath every casual encounter might lie a carefully concealed truth. Each person we meet holds their own stories close, beautiful, painful, complex, and the boundaries between sincerity and deception are thinner than we ever dare to imagine. Lucy's web unraveled my trust, but in the process, it opened my eyes. When I was 22, fresh out of college and desperate to escape my parents' house, I moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment with a roommate I'd found on Craigslist. Her name was Mara, and she seemed pretty cool. For the most part, I was right. Mara wasn't home much, and when she was, she mostly kept to herself. We exchanged pleasantries in the kitchen, occasionally watched TV together, and split household chores without any issues. It was the kind of roommate relationship I'd hoped for, friendly but not overly involved. Then, about 3 months into our lease, Mara's boyfriend, Bastian, entered the picture. The first time I met Bastian, I was coming home from work. He was sitting on the couch, shirtless, eating a bowl of cereal like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Hey," he said, flashing me a grin as I walked in. "You must be the roommate." I nodded, trying not to stare at his abs. "Yeah, that's me. You must be Bastian." "That's right," he said, leaning back and draping one arm over the back of the couch. "Mara's told me all about you." Something about his tone made me uneasy, but I brushed it off. He was attractive, tall, muscular, with dark hair and a cocky confidence that practically oozed out of him. I figured he was one of those guys who always acted like the star of his own movie. At first, Bastian's visits were infrequent. He'd come over on weekends, spend the night, and leave by mid-afternoon. I didn't mind. It was Mara's apartment too, and she was entitled to have her boyfriend over. But then he started showing up more often. It began with him staying an extra night here and there, then gradually escalated to him being at our apartment almost every day. He'd lounge on the couch, raid the fridge, and leave his stuff lying around like he lived there. The worst part? He wasn't subtle about the fact that he and Mara were active. Our apartment wasn't soundproof by any means, and their late-night activities made that painfully clear. Every creak of the bed, every muffled giggle, every exaggerated moan echoed through the thin walls. I tried to drown it out with headphones, white noise, and even a pillow over my head, but nothing worked. One particularly awkward night, I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard Mara yell, "Oh my God, Bastian, that's not where it goes." I froze, my hand hovering over the kettle. Did I just hear that correctly? A few seconds later, her voice came again, louder this time. "Seriously, stop. That's the wrong hole." I nearly dropped my mug. Bastian's laugh boomed through the apartment. "Relax, babe. I'm just experimenting." I fled to my room, my face burning with secondhand embarrassment. Things only got worse from there. One morning, I walked into the bathroom to find Bastian standing in front of the mirror, completely naked, flexing his muscles. He glanced at me in the reflection, grinned, and said, "Morning, roomie." I slammed the door shut before I could see any more. Later, when I confronted Mara about it, she just shrugged. "Oh, that's just Bastian being Bastian. He's comfortable in his own skin." "Yeah, well, I'm not comfortable with his skin," I snapped. "Can you please talk to him about wearing clothes in communal spaces?" She promised she would, but nothing changed. The final straw came one Saturday night. I had a date, something I'd been looking forward to all week, and I was getting ready in my room. I'd just finished putting on my makeup when there was a knock at my door. "Come in," I called, assuming it was Mara. To my surprise, it was Bastian. He leaned against the doorframe, his shirt unbuttoned and a mischievous smile on his face. "Wow," he said, looking me up and down. "You clean up nice." Thanks," I replied, feeling uneasy. "Got a hot date?" he asked, stepping into my room without waiting for an invitation. "Yes," I said, crossing my arms. "What do you want, Bastian?" He shrugged, his eyes lingering on me a little too long. "Just wanted to say you look good, that's all. If your date doesn't appreciate it, you know where to find me." I stared at him, my jaw dropping. Was he seriously hitting on me? "Get out," I said firmly. He held up his hands in mock surrender. All right. No need to get feisty." As he walked away, he added under his breath, "Feisty's kinda hot, though." That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. The next morning, I sat Mara down and told her everything. The late-night noises, the naked bathroom encounters, the inappropriate comments, it all came pouring out. To my surprise, she didn't defend him. Instead, she sighed and said, "Yeah, Bastian can be a lot." "A lot?" I repeated, incredulous. "Mara, he's acting like he owns the place." "I know," she said, looking genuinely apologetic. "I'll talk to him. I promise." A week later, Bastian was gone. Mara told me they'd broken up, though she didn't go into detail. All she said was, it just wasn't working out. I didn't press her for details. I was just relieved to have my apartment and my sanity back. Looking back, I can't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Bastian was like a walking, talking stereotype of the obnoxious boyfriend who overstays his welcome. If nothing else, the experience taught me an important lesson. Choose your roommates wisely. And if their boyfriend ever starts flexing naked in your bathroom, it's time to have a serious conversation. Not me directly, but a flatmate I used to live with, let's call her Abby. This is kind of two stories in one, so stay with me. Sitting comfortable? Then I shall begin. Abby, who since I had shared a flat with had not had much luck in the love department, some her own fault, some not. However, she was a lovely girl and a great sense of humor and sweet as anything. She was single as was I, and we decided one night to go to a speed date event where she ended up matching with this guy. Let's call Steve. Steve was actually really nice, and he used to come over for dinner, play Xbox, and him and Abby seemed pretty good together. He worked as a sales rep, and his work decided they needed to send him abroad. This was for 2 weeks, and at which time it was Abby's birthday party. They had been seeing each other for about 2 months at this point. Steve was gutted he would miss it, but said he would ring, etc., and that morning he did, and all was good. Abby had a gathering at our local pub/club, which was great. Loads of her friends turned up, and strangely one of her ex-boyfriends was working behind the bar. I knew him from before I moved in with her, and he was one of those cool sly cats that would, and could talk his way in and out of any situation. Several hours go by and Abby has had a great time, clearly very merry, and I too am feeling the drink by this time, so I head home with Abby, which is only a few minutes' walk. We get in and say night and wish her a happy birthday, and up I go to bed. Next day I come downstairs and start making coffee, and I hear the front door open and shut. I go out to look and I don't see anyone there. Abby appears in the lounge, and I assume she went out the front for some reason, and go to roll a cigarette and go outside myself. I think nothing of it, and the rest of the 2 weeks go by, and during this Abby is clearly missing Steve. Cut to Saturday, Steve is back and they go out to dinner. He has bought her roses for her birthday, yada yada yada, and clearly he has missed her a lot. I hear them come home after dinner and disappear off to her room. I venture off to my own room and start watching a movie and on the PC. About half an hour passes, and suddenly I hear shouting downstairs. I go out and they are arguing. He's saying he is so upset with her and that he cannot believe she would do this to him. He leaves and she's on the stairs crying. I go down and ask her what's wrong and what's happened. Turns out they had come home and gone to bed, and while Steve was fingering her he felt something and pulled out a used condom, which had been inside her for 11 days. Let that sink in for a few seconds. 11 days. No surprises who the owner was either, the ex from her birthday party. Smooth Sly Jeff and his sly shaft. She admitted she remembers him turning up at the door. She hadn't gone straight to bed, so she was still up, and she let him in as he had brought drinks with him. They stayed up chatting, and he had given her a present. She does remember saying he can stay over on the couch as it was late, but somehow they ended upstairs. Then she remembers him kissing her, which led them to having sex, consensual. She felt terrible, but as it was a big mistake and she thought she could hide it. Clearly not. We never saw Steve again, sadly. Nice guy, and Abby regrets it completely. Only human, I guess. Now the second part is a few months later, she decided Match.com would be her ticket to a new man. She was soon flooded with matches and decided to go on a date with this guy who we will call Romeo. Before she went, I was giving her advice, the usual be yourself stuff, and she went and had a great time by all accounts of the loud sex that was happening in the house later that night. The next morning she came down to the kitchen, and I asked if all was good, and she said she was happy, and she had found the one. I felt she was a little off for thinking this, first date, but she had had the bad breakup before this, so I thought she was just catching feelings early and getting caught up in the moment. She goes off for a shower, and I'm still making breakfast. Cue Romeo walking in, and without missing a beat, he says he's leaving now, and to tell her it was fun. I asked why he was going now, and that Abby would only be a few minutes. His reply was, "My wife will be home shortly, need to get home before she does." At this point I bit my tongue and he left. Abby came down after getting dressed and asked where Romeo was. I questioned her about him and what had happened. He never told her he was married, and to top it off they hadn't used protection. Didn't even get his mobile number either, which made tracking him down impossible when she found out she had contracted a nasty STD and was pregnant. His profile disappeared from Match.com the day after he walked out. She did send a message to them, but heard nothing back. Sadly, she didn't make it to full term. I moved out about 2 years after, at which point she was happily with a new guy. Everyone feels lonely sometimes. For me, last night struck a little harder than usual. I'm not sure why it did, but it led to me downloading Tinder. When irrational thoughts get to you, you start to think of irrational solutions to your problem. I figured I would get on Tinder and swipe the night away, as it seemed like the easiest fix for my problem. I have always believed that dating apps aren't made to pair you with a potential lover, but rather to make you feel insecure, so you spend more time on the app. Because of this, I was surprised to find a girl called Jessica had liked me back within 10 minutes of me using the app. I felt like she was fake at first, but I'd rather find out than contemplate about the possibility, so I texted her. She responded within a few minutes, and we started talking. What felt like minutes of talking had turned into hours. When I looked at the time, I was surprised to see that it was 1 a.m., so I told her that I had to sleep because I had to wake up early for work in the morning, but that I'd love to text with her again. She replied, "Oh yeah, no problem. If you give me your phone number, we can get off this app," smiley face. Without hesitation, I gave her my phone number and went to sleep. I woke up and started the day as I usually do. I ate breakfast, took a shower, brushed my teeth, and got on my way to work. I have worked for a newspaper for over 5 years, where I get to write about all types of things. Today I had to write about a man who went missing not too far from where I live. He was 2 years younger than me and lived alone. It's been 2 weeks since his disappearance, and the local authorities decided to use the newspaper in hopes someone would have more information. As I was finishing up the story about the missing person, I got a text message from the girl. She asked me how work was and if I had anything to do that evening. I caught myself smiling at the text message and ridiculed myself for already being head over heels for this girl, despite not having met her in person. I always tend to get attached to people too quickly, which is usually why my relationships don't go as I would like them to. Because of this, I cursed my mind for feeling this way. I waited a few minutes before answering her text, because I felt like it would make me seem more mysterious and busier than I actually am. I'm not sure why, but I figured it would be better than replying within 5 seconds. "Yeah, I'm free. Getting off from work soon. What do you have in mind?" I sent the message and went back to finish the news article. Once I had finished it, I sent it to my boss for confirmation and left work for the day. When I looked at my phone, she replied to my message. "How about you come over to my place in an hour? We can chat and have some fun." Without hesitation, I quickly opened the chat and replied, completely disregarding my previous strategy. "That sounds great. I'll be on my way soon." A few minutes after that, she sent me her address, which was not far from where I lived. It's about a 15-minute walk. As I made my way to her house, I was imagining all the possible situations that might occur, any conversations we might have, and what the best responses would be. I arrived at her house 10 minutes earlier than she said, but being early is usually considered a good thing. I knocked on the door of her house and waited for a little bit, but got no response. I grabbed my phone and told her I was at her house. While waiting for a response, I decided to look around the house to see if maybe I could see her through one of the windows. I made my way to the back of her house and quickly found myself standing in the garden. Standing in the garden, I immediately noticed something odd. It seemed like she had done some digging a few days ago. I figured she had tiles in her garden, which she decided to remove. Before I had the chance to think about it any longer, I heard her voice yell at me from a window above me. "Oh hey, you're already here. Let me open the door." I waved at her awkwardly and was startled by her sudden appearance. I quickly regained my composure and made my way back to the front door, where I was met with her beautiful smile and a gesture for me to come in. "You want something to drink?" she asked. Some water would be great, thanks," I replied awkwardly. I forgot how shy I can get around people when it's not over text. It's a whole different experience for me. I could tell she picked up on it, and she was amazing when it came to talking to people, because she managed to make me feel at ease quickly. She handed me my drink, and we started talking like we had the night before, the only difference being that this was face-to-face. After talking for a bit, I asked her if I could use the bathroom. "There's one right down the hall," she said, pointing to the general direction. I stood up and made my way to where she was pointing. I live in a big city and matched with a girl who lived way out in the suburbs. She wanted to meet downtown in the city and asked me to choose a place. She had fairly strict dietary requirements, but I found a good place that has 2 or 3 locations in the city. It wasn't anything like Olive Garden, but since this is about nightmares, let's say it was an Olive Garden. I sent her a text something like, "Let's meet at the Olive Garden on Main Street near City Hall." She agrees. The night of the date arrives. She, however, does not. She calls and says she's looking for parking. I'd had no idea she'd be driving into the city. No one I interact with in the city owns a car, and there's good train service from her suburb, but whatever. I look up parking garages for her, but she keeps saying she can't find them. I finally ask her to read me a street sign. Turns out she's halfway across the city. I'm confused and tell her I'm downtown like we'd planned. She gets angry and says I sent her a link to the restaurant, so that's where she went. I was pretty confused since I had never sent a link. Then I figured it out. Her phone had done that thing where it underlines the name of a business and turns it into a link. But it had chosen some other random Olive Garden nowhere near Main Street or City Hall, and she had mindlessly assumed it was the only Olive Garden in the entire huge city, even though it was nowhere near where I had described. Red flag number 1. Getting angry at me about it and blaming me, red flag number 2. But I am too nice for my own good, so I offered to go meet her at the other Olive Garden. She says no, she'll park and get a taxi. She finds it extremely difficult to find the restaurant even with the exact address and Google Maps. She apparently cannot communicate well enough with the taxi driver to get him to understand the address. Red flags numbers 3 and 4. She finally arrives, and I've ordered her food that fits all her dietary restrictions. She likes her dinner, and we have cordial but boring conversation. She gets a hankering for tea, so I take her to a really nice tea place. I suggest a scenic walk back to her car. She agrees. The walk is scenic, but the conversation is boring, stilted, and hard to maintain. Red flag number 5. I see her to her car, and she goes cold and doesn't really look at me or say goodbye when she leaves. I get the strong impression she was just faking enjoying my company during the walk and is now relieved the date is over. Fair enough. By this point I felt the same way, although I was being more polite about it. Red flag number 6, but who cares at this point? Neither one of us appears interested in a second date whatsoever, so no big deal. I sigh with relief, text her good night, and move on with my life. 2 days later, she texts me saying it was very rude of me not to reach out again. I tell her I got the impression she didn't want to hear from me. She texts, "You're wrong." Okay. She asks if I'd like a second date, and I politely explain that it was nice meeting her, but I don't think we really had much of a connection. She gets pissed. Over the next few hours, with few replies from me, she berates me for sending her to the wrong restaurant and demands that I pay for A, her taxi, B, her gas, C, her tolls, and D, her parking. She sends me a Venmo account. I'm too nice for my own good, so I say that I will pay for the taxi, since I did choose the place, even though I did specify where it was and she ignored that information. I Venmo her the taxi money, but say sorry, I didn't even know you'd be driving to our date, so I'm not going to pay for your gas, tolls, or parking. She repeatedly insults me over this and says I forced her to incur these costs. In fact, I had said several times that we didn't have to meet downtown if somewhere else was more convenient, and she'd always said it was fine. She ends by saying she's going to call my employer and tell them how I treat people. So yeah, stupidity, entitlement, zero chemistry, and blackmail. Not a great date. Definitely too late, but this was very recent, and I feel like sharing it somewhere as I don't like telling people around me that I use Tinder. So I matched with this guy, your average surfer boy. Seemed like a kind person, and everything we shared socials quite fast, and I noticed he had a Jesus reference going on top of his longish hair, and I thought that was kind of cute. He kept asking to meet, and I remind you this was already during the COVID-19 social distancing thing going on. So I politely declined, and he didn't seem to get it, and every time I declined, he would make a more aggressive remark, kind of hinting at what was to come. He kept saying, "Oh, it's a joke, it's fake news, it's bullshit, blah blah blah," and I shrugged it off first. On his Instagram story, I saw he had posted something about this far-right conspiracy theory and telling people to wake up. He bragged about how he was deliberately ignoring the safety guidelines in every way possible. I was getting uncomfortable. Interestingly, the whole far-right conspiracy thing didn't bother me that much. I've grown up in a right-wing environment and have become desensitized to all that stuff and can generally accept other people's opinions as long as they don't actively treat other people like crap. But this whole narrative he had going on that he didn't believe in a confirmed freaking epidemic because of some silly conspiracy theory and chose to ignore safety procedures, and with that putting other people at risk, freaked me out. So he asked me, again, to come and meet him on a Friday night. He downright invited me to his home with some friends for a drinking game night. I was definitely not having that, so I told him I was not leaving the house at the moment. He said fair enough. The day after, he seemed completely oblivious about what I had explained to him the night before, and asked again like literally every day, "Do you want to do something?" And I just thought to myself, he really isn't seeing that this is serious, so I asked him about it. And he started ranting about how much bullshit this thing was, so I told him my brother had contracted it, and he was trying to tell me it's fake. Okay, fair enough. So I tried asking for proof, albeit I was absolutely not going to believe a word he was saying, as I had already lost all respect I had left for him. So he went on a xenophobic, anti-Semitic rage. I sat there just laughing, even though it was just sad. It's funny to see these people taking themselves so seriously, and they are so far up their own asses with their delusions. It's like talking to a brick wall. So I let him rant for a few moments. Let the kid pour it out before he writes a manifesto and plans a terror attack, right? But when he started calling me a snowflake, assuming that I was just believing everything the media was feeding me, that's when I'd had enough. I'm studying philosophy and psychology, so this was a very interesting encounter for me to observe, though not very pleasant. I asked him a row of very valid questions, like in what way he deemed himself of being better believing in these stupid conspiracy theories than people buying everything the mass media feeds them, and then he started getting really defensive. I hit his weak toxic masculine spot, and that's when he went on a sexist rampage, telling me I deserved to get raped. I have no clue where that came from. That was the final straw for me, though. I do not tolerate men condoning rape, so I told him that it was an interesting encounter, that I was sorry for him, he was too far gone, that I no longer wished to be talking to a brick wall, and that I hoped for him to learn how to think for himself. That because he told everyone to open their eyes and question things and think, well, truth be told, most people never learn how to properly think. It's an odd thought, but sadly true. I told him when he tried to prove one of his silly theories with another silly theory, congrats, he could read some stupid theory, check if it fits into his agenda, and then interpret it accordingly. I call it the bias check. That is the first step of taking up information. Now all he needed was to learn to actually think for himself, and that is something you don't learn if you aren't challenged philosophically in one way or another. His name was Idris. We matched on an app one barely remember downloading. I'd been in a strange mood that week, tired of the silence, tired of the scrolling. His profile was unassuming. A single photo, him in an oversized coat, leaning against a brick wall, looking away from the camera. His bio said, "Asking the right questions is more intimate than touching." I should have known better. We met for coffee at a place called Clarity House. Minimalist furniture, white walls, windows that let in too much light. He was already seated when I arrived, sipping black coffee from a ceramic cup, no phone in sight. "Zara?" he asked, standing to shake my hand. His palm was dry and warm. "Yes," I said, and sat across from him. From the start, something about him felt fixed, as if he was fully present in a way most people weren't. He never broke eye contact. He didn't fidget. He didn't seem bored or distracted or waiting for his turn to speak. At first, it was refreshing. Then the questions started. What's the worst thing your parents ever said to you? I blinked. That's a little intense for a first date. He tilted his head, smiling faintly. You don't have to answer. I just like to know what shaped people. I shrugged it off. I'd had worse openers. We kept talking. He asked where I grew up, what my childhood bedroom looked like, the name of my first pet. I told him, carefully editing as I went. When I asked what he did for work, he said, I freelance. Mostly data mapping. I didn't know what that meant. He avoided talking about himself. Every question I asked came back to me. Do you believe in fate? What's the last lie you told someone you love? Would you rather be watched or forgotten? That one made me pause. I don't know, I said. Neither sounds great. He nodded slowly. Most people say that, but you hesitated. After an hour, I suggested we go for a walk. The coffee shop felt too bright, too exposed. Outside, the sun was low, painting everything in soft gold. We walked without direction, down side streets and into quieter parts of the neighborhood. He asked more questions. How often do you cry? What password do you use most often? I stared at him. Kidding, he said quickly. Just seeing if you were still paying attention. But I wasn't laughing. We reached a small park with a narrow path that wound through a patch of trees. I slowed my steps, suddenly unsure if I wanted to go deeper into the shade with him. I think I'll head back, I said. Early morning tomorrow. He didn't argue. Just nodded again, calm as ever. I enjoyed our conversation, he said. Not many people are honest. I forced a smile. Thanks. As I turned to leave, I noticed a car idling across the street. Matte black. Windows tinted too dark to see through. It wasn't moving, but the engine was running. I glanced back at Idris. He was still standing there, hands in his coat pockets, watching me. I walked home quickly, checking over my shoulder more than once. The car didn't follow. At least, not that I could tell. That night, I didn't sleep well. The next day, I got a text from an unknown number. You looked beautiful when you smiled at the pigeons. I hadn't told anyone about that. It had happened after the date, on my walk home. I'd paused near the fountain, laughed as a bird waddled toward my feet. I blocked the number. 2 days later, I received another message. Your door makes a soft creak when you lock it, like it's whispering. I checked the locks. Nothing looked tampered with. I installed a new deadbolt and bought a camera for the hallway. But the messages kept coming. Do you ever feel like you're being studied? The green sweater suits you. It makes you look softer. I don't think you even know what you're afraid of. I called the police. They took a report. I showed them the messages, mentioned the date. They asked if I'd ever invited him to my home, given him my address. I hadn't. They said there wasn't much they could do unless he entered the property or made a direct threat. I started taking different routes home. I wiped my social media. I switched to private accounts, changed my passwords. Then one evening, I noticed the black car again. Parked across the street. Lights off. Engine silent this time. I didn't go outside. The next morning, a package was waiting at my door. No return address. Inside was a flash drive and a neatly folded sheet of paper. The note read, "It's not stalking if it's a study." I didn't plug in the drive. I took it to the police. They confiscated it and told me they'd add it to the file. I asked if they'd found anything on Idris. There's no record of anyone by that name matching your description, the officer said. No social media, no official ID, nothing in the local database. Story 7. I think it's a tie between my second ever date and the first date I went on through Tinder after my long-term relationship ended in January. My second ever date. I was 16, he was 18. Our families were friends, and I'd had a crush on him for years, while he basically ignored me and treated me like one of his sister's friends. Eventually, we were all playing D&D. He was a horrible DM, but that is a different story, and I asked him out. Our first date was pretty typical high schooler stuff, and we agreed to be a couple after it. Our second date, however, my mom agreed to let him pick me up, and he did, and we were going to play laser tag. So he drives there, and he's a horrible driver, like I was hanging for dear life, and his car is unbearably warm. So we get there, and turns out Sunday mid-afternoon is a terrible time to go play laser tag, because the place is full of screaming children, but we each get a triple play and wait for our game group to get called and chat while we wait. The first game is kinda awful as we are the only people over about 8 or 9 playing, but we have some fun, and we go back and sit down in the arcade to wait for the second game. He sees a candy machine and decides to get what he thinks are pretzel M&Ms, but are pretty clearly peanut M&Ms. Side note. He's deathly allergic to peanuts and usually forgot his AP pen and shouldn't have been having any M&Ms. Well, I notice he's about to eat a peanut M&M and tell him, and he doesn't believe me. So I take one and smash it to show him it's peanut, and he is like, "Oh, well, thanks for catching that." At this point, I'm just like, WTF is going on here? Because at Halloween like 5 months earlier, his best friend had to tackle a Snickers out of his hand because he thought it was a Milky Way and just didn't bother to check for some reason. But we play the second game and decide to go get ice cream at a gas station across the parking lot. We walk over and each pick out ice cream and get in line to check out. I check out and walk outside to start eating, and then realize he isn't right behind me. After a few minutes he walks out too, now carrying the ice cream he wanted, Gatorade and Twizzlers, which we'd just been discussing was both of our favorite candy. We start walking back towards his car, and after finishing his ice cream, he stands next to his car and proceeds to eat the entire LB of Twizzlers without offering me a single one. Then we get in his car and go to his house where his sister and a friend are about to leave with his dad. Catch up with his sister for a bit. She teases me about dating her brother. She's a year younger than me, and we were friends at the time. We never had a falling out, just lost touch when I left for college. Then they leave and his mom asks me to help settle an argument about which color gray to paint their living room. As in, so what do you think of these paint swatches? Then suggest we go watch a movie or something in their basement. My date decided no, we were going to play Call of Duty. He knew I hated first-person shooters. In the living room while his mom cooked dinner about 20 feet away. So he sat on one end of the couch and I sat like one seat over because I was hoping to at least get to be vaguely near him. He jumped up and ran to the far end of the couch. It was a 4-seat sectional. Eventually he picks up on me really not liking Call of Duty, and we switch to watching random Monty Python clips, till it's about 5:15-ish, 30-minute drive, and my mom wanted me home at 6. So I say goodbye to his mom, and he drives me home. About 5 minutes from my house he asks if I want him to turn the seat heater down. Turns out he'd had it cranked up max the entire time, despite it being like 70 degrees out, because it was a prank he'd played on his best friend the week before, and he didn't think to turn it off till the end of the date. Well, that's when I pulled my phone out and realized it wouldn't turn on. The seat heater fried the induction loop in my phone, and the battery was completely shot. We get to my house, and he walks me to the front door, gives me a super brief hug, and says bye. We went out one more time. That time I tried to kiss his cheek when we were saying goodbye, and he physically ran away from me, and then stopped answering my texts and calls for 2 weeks, till I broke up with him via email. According to his sister, she and his mom were roasting him for that for months too, since when they asked him why, he said he just didn't feel like talking to me and would call me back later, when I was freaking calling their house to try to break up with him, like his sister knew I was trying to dump him before he did. Terrible Tinder date. It's a Wednesday after work. We are both 23 BTW. And we match and are chatting, and he asks if I want to grab drinks or something, and I'm bored AF. So I suggest an Irish pub near me that I know pretty well. Get there, order a lemonade. The waitress picked up on it being a blind date and told me to get her attention, and she'd help me get back to my car if things went really off the rails. The guy showed up, ordered a shot of Crown Royal, did it as a shot, then asked for the check. We were just sitting and chatting for like an hour or so when he eventually tried to invite himself back to my place to play Switch. At that point I realize I have zero interest in seeing him again, but he's so hilariously awkward that I stick around just to see what he does next. So we wander over to a local park with an ice skating rink. It's January, and we live in Michigan, so it was mostly heated pavilion with people around and light. Well, he goes on a rant about how he wants to date me, but after his last relationship, he doesn't want anything physical at all, including kissing, until he's been in a relationship for at least 6 months, and probably not till a year or 2 for sex. And I'm sitting there going, WTF dude, then starts bitching about how his sister kicked him out because he was eating all her food, and how he doesn't know how to cook because it's too hard, and then tried to demand I cook for him. At this point is where I just said something about it getting late, and he left, and then I left a minute or 2 later. Story 6. Oh boy, so we met briefly at karaoke thanks to a common friend, and after I left, he asked her for my number. My friend asked if she could give it to him, and I said okay. Over the next few days, we texted a lot, and found out we had enough in common that I was up for a date and to see where things go. We start to make plans, and he said that he loves to cook and would love to have me come over for a meal and then hang out, maybe watch a movie. I was okay going to his house since my friend vouched that he was a good guy and her BF was his roommate. So I showed up to his house and knocked, but he did not answer. I texted him to tell him I was there. He just said to come on in. So I let myself in, and I find him at his computer. He says he is finishing up a raid and will be done soon. He was playing WoW. I sit down on the couch and ask him how his day was, what was for dinner, and what movie he wanted to watch, etc. But he did not answer past just yes and okays. After about 15 minutes, he finally finished his raid. He gets up and goes to the kitchen. He says dinner is ready already, and that we had about 30 minutes to eat before the next raid. I am a bit confused and asked him directly if we were still on for watching a movie or if we should move this date to another day. He kind of just shrugged and said, yep. So he brings me over dinner. Dinner was fish sticks, pizza rolls, and a giant cup of Mountain Dew. I am not picky, and I'm thinking that maybe this all he had on hand or could not afford something else. He ate his food in 2 minutes flat. I am barely done with one fish stick when he asks if I am ready. I'm like, ready for what? He then brings out a laptop and sets it on the table in front of me. He loads up WoW and asks me if I have ever played it. I told him no, that I don't play a lot of PC games, but I have played Elder Scrolls a bit. He sighs and says, well, it is really easy. I just need you to play this character and hang back and just cast. Then he proceeded to give me a quick overview of what I needed to do. I honestly am taken back. He did not say anything about this when we set up the date, and it was not even like he was trying to show me something that he was into. He was just matter of fact about that I needed to play this caster, hang back, and don't talk, because he needs to hear the rest of the party. I then finally put it all together. He never really wanted to hang out and watch movies. He was a person short for this raid and needed someone to stand in. He then walks back over to his computer and tells me to be ready. I'm still just flabbergasted that this was his idea of a date. If this had been discussed beforehand and he wanted to teach me something that he liked, I may not have had a problem. So the raid starts, I suck and die really quickly. He tells me, thanks for nothing, and keeps playing on. I kid you not, he did not even notice that I left. He then texted me a couple of hours later asking why I left, and he said that he was very sad I did not want to finish our date. They won the raid, and he would have loved to cuddle up and watch a movie before the next raid started at like 1 a.m. I told him that this was not a good first date, and that if he just wanted a stand-in, he should have asked someone who was into the game. He told me that this game is his life, and that to accept him is to accept that this game comes before anything else. I stopped talking to him and blocked his number. I told my friend to please never give my number to anyone ever again. Another story here for you. The summer before my sophomore year of college, I was back at my parents' house because the dorms were closed. I was hanging out with a friend when we ran into two of her friends. One was a guy who I'll call Jeff. My friend introduced all of us, and we all clicked decently well, so we exchanged numbers so we could possibly hang out later in the summer. We all hung out twice more before I had to go back to school. I did band and had to be there early, plus I went further for school than any of them. Then comes the date. A few days before I leave, Jeff texted me and asked if I wanted to catch a movie with the group before I went back. I figured why not. My mom dropped me off and said that my dad could pick me up after work, so I had probably 4-ish hours to kill. I get to the theater, and Jeff is the only one there. He also said he already got our tickets, and he had 4. Weird but not that weird because my friend is notoriously late for everything. I text her in the 4th person for an ETA, and they have no clue what I'm talking about. I confront Jeff about them not knowing, and he says, how else would I get you alone for a date? He also said something to the effect of, after the movie, we can be like the wild dinos and fuck. We were supposed to see the first Jurassic World movie. So I started freaking out internally, because why did Jeff lie instead of just asking if I wanted to hang out one-on-one? Why buy extra tickets to sell the lie? Did he think I'd just say, oh well, my friends didn't show up to plans. I'm not going to text them to check that they're alright. And who fucking does hip thrusts while making a sex joke in a movie theater entryway when there's kids around? He also knew that I was ace and not at all interested in sex with anyone, which made the joke even worse. I texted my parents trying to see if they can help, but they were both at work. I texted some other friends, and thankfully one was getting off her summer job like 20 minutes away. She told me to just grab my bag, head to the ladies' room, and hide until she could get there. Jeff started texting me about 5 minutes later asking what was taking so long, and said he'd just come wait by the bathroom for me, because he didn't want to watch the movie without me. I told him it was fine because I had already seen it, and I was just having some lady issues. He responded disgusting. But I'm waiting for you. My friend got a manager to escort her to the bathroom, and both of us out in case Jeff actually was waiting. I told the others I was uncomfortable around Jeff and didn't want to be at any future hangouts if he was. They both apologized a lot, but they definitely weren't at fault.